The Louisville offense erupted for 56 points in a victory over Boston College on Saturday afternoon. Quarterback Jack Plummer was phenomenal. Running back Jawhar Jordan continued his hot start to the 2023 season, and a bunch of receivers got involved for the Cardinals on Saturday. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we're going to break down the Cardinals' 4-0 start and more. With that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. On today's episode of the show, we are giving our initial reaction to the Louisville Cardinals' 56-28 victory over Boston College on Saturday afternoon. The offense, obviously, the main talking point in this one. The Cardinals erupted for 56 points. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the defense doing what it needed to do to win this game comfortably. And then we'll sort of take a step back, look at these first four games as a whole, and talk about the 4-0 start, the first 4-0 start for the program since Lamar Jackson's Heisman season in 2016. So, obviously, the main talking point for this game was offense. Louisville scored early and often, and they simply did not let up. They scored, and then they scored again, and then they scored again. And while I've been talking, they probably scored some more. Over 40 points in the first half. Louisville ended up leading this game 42-14 at halftime. The Cardinals scoring on their first 7 possessions of the game, spanning all of the first half and a couple minutes of the third quarter. They scored on the first play of the third quarter with the Jawhar Jordan halfback screen that ultimately ended up in a, I believe, 75-yard touchdown catch and run. But as I mentioned, Louisville scored touchdowns on the first 7 possessions. That's the first time that any Louisville team has done that since the Cardinals did it back in 2007, and they did it against Murray State. So it was against an FCS opponent. Like I said, no disrespect to Murray State, but this is against a Power 5 opponent, ACC opponent in conference play. Extremely, extremely encouraging and impressive, I must say. Now, if you were coming into this game not really sold on the offense despite the team putting up some big-time yardage numbers and points, you probably either left this game or turned this game off, probably not being in that line of thinking any longer. This offensive performance was one of the most dominant offensive performances I've seen from a Louisville team in, frankly, quite some time. The Cardinals had 582 yards total, 388 in the air, 194 on the ground. The big talking point for me on offense, honestly, you could say that there's no one person to talk about more than the other because this was an extremely balanced attack. And I would agree with that. I think that from the trenches to the quarterback to the skill position players, the Louisville offense was absolutely incredible. But since this has been a talking point, both on this show and via the fan base, I felt it was definitely needed to address this early on. The play of quarterback Jack Plummer. Plummer came into this game, and I remember talking with Grant Mulligan, State of Louisville football analyst who comes onto this show weekly. We talked about how or why Louisville needed to get a good performance from Plummer in this game specifically because of the tough tests that are awaiting the Cardinals in the upcoming weeks. there were questions among the fan base still as to whether or not Plummer was the guy for the Cardinals at the quarterback position. I wasn't really in that line of thinking. I thought that there was still some stuff for him to prove, but I didn't necessarily think that with him improving each and every week that he was in jeopardy of losing his starting job unless he absolutely just had a performance that you couldn't look past. But that really wasn't the case. He was looking better and better. But I acknowledge that we needed to see the best version of Jack Plummer that we've seen thus far in Week 4 against Boston College, and we definitely did. Plummer was absolutely phenomenal. Had a couple of mistakes, but who doesn't? Was pretty close to being perfect statistically. 18 of 21 in terms of passing. 388 yards and 5 touchdowns. I thought that he was looking extremely comfortable throwing the deep ball. There wasn't a ton of hesitation. Shout out to the offensive line for creating that time for him to go through his reads, but he made a couple of big-time throws. Huggins-Bruce got involved. He led the Cardinals with 3 receptions for 110 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jawhar Jordan obviously had the touchdown catch and run. Jamari Thrash had 5 for 71 and a touchdown, most notably that touchdown right before the end of the half that put Louisville up once again by 28 points. And then you have multiple receivers get involved. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 receivers record a catch. 4 of them caught touchdown passes, including Nate Kariski, who got his first touchdown catch of his career. Overall, Plummer looked extremely comfortable, and he once again showed that he can make it happen with his legs as well. Only carried the ball for 6 carries for 2 yards when you equate sack yardage as well, but had a touchdown on the second or third and goal to where he had double pump fakes and fooled the defender enough to get to the outside and then dive for the pylon and score. I thought that this was the best game that we've seen from Plummer by far. Jeff Brom would probably echo those sentiments as well. Plummer was absolutely fantastic. And then we're going to talk about this, especially whenever I get back from a sales conference, which I will be going to this week, by the way. We'll talk about that here momentarily. But after I get back, we're going to have a conversation about how Jawhar Jordan is the most underrated running back in the country. He's starting to get more and more recognition, but what he's been able to do this year, I don't want to hear the whole, well, it's a matter of competition. A lot of these players that are putting up big-time numbers have done so without playing big-time competition, and Louisville has played 3 Power 5 opponents in the first 4 games. Not the greatest schedule, but it's not like you're just playing cupcakes every single week. Jawhar Jordan continued his hot start to the season. 18 carries for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had the 1 catch for 75 yards and a touchdown. Absolutely phenomenal. We see of what he's been able to do this year. He's still, playing very, very well in terms of the efficiency after the carry. When he gets to that second level of the defense, it's going to be hard to take him down. So there's a very, very huge focus on tackling him at the line of scrimmage. But the efficiency numbers are there. They're going to be there after this week as well because of his ability to break runs. Also, I think we're going to see him involved more in the passing game, considering that elusiveness, that shiftiness, agility, etc. So, the yards per carry numbers might not necessarily be as inflated as they have been. I mean, they're obviously going to come down. It is what it is. But Jawhar Jordan has been fantastic. In my opinion, he is definitely going to get over 1,000 yards. I said it once in the offseason. I said it a million times in the offseason. He was the next 1,000-yard rusher for the Louisville Cardinals. And I definitely think that is going to be the case. He is close to, I think it is he's close to about 500 yards, if I'm not mistaken, through 4 games on the season. So that just goes to show you that the opportunities are going to be there. So offensively, Very unselfish in terms of target share. I liked that Plummer went to more players than just Jamari Thrash. There's no problem with going to Jamari Thrash. I just like that this offense showed just how many weapons it has at the skill positions. Jack Plummer had his best performance as a Cardinal, hands down, by far, no debate. So I do want to sort of flip the script and talk about the defense, though. The defense did what it needed to do to win the game comfortably, but there's still been some criticism for this defensive unit. We'll talk about what some of those criticisms are here momentarily after we talk about our friends over and the title sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Create your profile, add a job post with the purple hashtag hiring frame to your profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills that you're looking for, because creating that positive impact is crucial. And you do that by adding the right team member. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Also want to take this time to tell you about our friends over at DoorDash. Do you need fresh groceries for the week but don't have the time to go to the store? Try grocery delivery from DoorDash. You'll get everything you want delivered when you need it right to your door. You've trusted DoorDash for the past couple of years to deliver your restaurant favorites, and now you can get grocery delivery that actually delivers too. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order. That's 50% off your first order up to a $20 value when you use the code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout. Limited time offer. Terms apply. That's 50% off up to $20, no minimal subtotal, and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter the code LOCKEDONCollege. Don't forget, that's the code LOCKEDONCollege for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. We are 4 games into the schedule, and Locked On has you covered through the entirety of this season with the Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, and go in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. Continuing on along in this reaction episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, Louisville defeating Boston College 56-28 on Saturday afternoon. Obviously, the main talking point is the offense absolutely exploding against the Eagles for 56 points. But I think that the defensive performance is a little bit harder to dissect and talk about, because on one hand, I felt like the defense did what it needed to do. On the other hand, I felt like there was some drives to where it was way too easy for Boston College to go down the field and score. I've talked to a couple people about the defensive performance, and they've actually brought up some key points that I hadn't really entertained at the moment, but I definitely want to talk about them because, for starters, I mean, you held Boston College to essentially what they're scoring throughout the season. In the 4 games, they have scored between 24 to 31 points. They scored 29 points on Florida State, and holding them to 28 doesn't necessarily feel like it's grounds for panicking or anything like that and saying that the Louisville defense can't get the job done, because obviously they did. And even if Louisville didn't go full-on juggernaut mode and put up 56 points, if they put up 35 or so, you're still winning this game, albeit it's a lot closer than you want it to be. But in theory, you're still winning this game. Thomas Castellanos started the game out in the first 4 drives with under 10 passing yards, and then he exploded. And he was able to find guys over the middle, down the field, without much interference from the opposing defensive backs. And he was able to find the end zone with his receivers 3 times. He had a touchdown carry as well. Overall on the day, 17 of 33, 265 yards, 3 touchdowns, 10 carries, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Got replaced by Emmett Moorhead in the fourth quarter, or he might have gotten more statistical numbers. But, I mean, when we talked about containing Castellanos, I felt like you didn't let him go absolutely crazy. I mean, he still put up solid numbers, and shout out to him for being able to do that. But I felt like at times it was extremely easy for him to do so. There were opportunities to where the Cardinals gave up chunk yardage plays way too easily. They allowed Boston College to convert on 3rd and long. There were instances to where Louisville had guys wrapped up in the backfield and they were able to escape the tackles. And I think tackling is going to be a point of emphasis, obviously, heading into next week against NC State. But there's also this talk that Louisville scored the ball very, very quickly throughout the entirety of this game. There were some drives to where they marched down the field, double-digit plays, and ended up scoring. But there were also drives where they scored in less than 5 plays. And when your offense is scoring that much at that quick of intervals, then the other team on the other side of the argument, the other team is going to get more opportunities to score as well. So you could make the argument very quickly that by the sheer number of drives that Boston College had, it's less likely that you're going to stop Boston College on X amount of drives than you would in a normal game where they're only getting this amount of drives. If they're getting more drives to score the football, chances are, probability is going to point to Boston College is probably going to score more than they would if they weren't getting the ball as much. Granted, I think that the defense, there's still room for improvement. They gave up 427 yards. I feel like some of that was in prevent defense as well. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of prevent defense. I mean, I'm not a coach or anything. I'm just your local podcast host. I really am never a fan of prevent defense. I don't feel like it works. I feel like it just allows teams to take what you give them and march down the field and eventually score, especially, chunk yardage plays right over the middle, 10 yards, 10 yards, 10 yards, 10 yards, touchdown sort of idea. Obviously, I think that it really applies to only a certain set of situations and scenarios to where that makes a lot of sense. But, I mean, who am I to say that it's wrong? I think that this defensive performance was good enough to where Louisville was able to win this game comfortably. It wasn't a terrible performance. I mean, they only allowed 28 points. They got after the quarterback a little bit more. They had 3 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. They also, did a solid job of eliminating the big plays for the most part. They had some instances to where, Ryan O'Keefe had a 38-yard touchdown catch. Thomas Castellanos had a 39-yard touchdown run. But the defense did what it needed to do to at least keep the Boston College offense at bay. Definitely credit to the unit for keeping this offense pretty stagnant in the first part of the game that allowed Louisville to increase that lead and get to a point to where, you're sort of just making sure, you're managing the game and making sure that Boston College doesn't pop off and, start throwing the ball over the field, scoring at will, and you get into a big-time shootout. I mean, I think that Louisville did what it needed to do. I think that fans get a little bit too hypercritical, with Louisville games because we saw the Cardinals almost blow a 21-0 lead last week against Indiana. But defensive performance was not perfect. But at the end of the day, I felt like it was good enough. And it was solid enough to at least, look at some positives there. Jalen Alderman, shout out to him. He had a sack, a tackle for loss, and 8 total tackles, led the Cardinals in tackles. Jarvis Brownlee had 5, Ben Perry with 5, TJ Quinn with 5, Stephen Herron had 4 as well. So ultimately, shout out to the Louisville Cardinals as a whole. I would say that this is the most complete performance that they've had all year outside of that game against Murray State. The team is 4-0 for the first time since 2016. The 4-game slate to where I said Louisville needed to win every single game because the ceiling of this team depended on it. That slate is over and the job is complete. We're going to talk about the Cardinals starting out 4-0 here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers have an opportunity. The NFL season is continuing on along, and if you didn't know, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, but new customers can get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a measly $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets back, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. Once again, FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL. I alluded to me being out of town for the upcoming parts of this week. I will be in Florida for a sales conference this upcoming week. I actually leave Sunday afternoon. I won't get back into town until Thursday afternoon-ish. So there will be this episode, but we won't start NC State preview until Thursday. I hope to have 2 episodes on Thursday, sort of giving you a little bit of preview before that matchup on Friday. I understand it's not ideal in terms of timing, but you kind of have to do what you got to do, and we'll at least preview it a little bit before that matchup on Friday. But before we do that, I want to wrap up this first of the 3 4-game slates for the Cardinals. The first portion of the schedule, the first 4 games, Georgia Tech, Murray State, Indiana, and Boston College. All 4 games Louisville was projected to win. And I mentioned that if Louisville wanted to get to that echelon where you are potentially flirting with 10 victories, you are at the 8-9 threshold and potentially close to that double-digit victory number. You had to win these first 4 games, no matter what, in my opinion. Obviously, I mean, you could make the theoretical argument and say, well, I mean, look at Louisville last year. They started out rough, and then they ended up winning games they weren't supposed to, and so on and so forth. You needed to win these first 4 games. You did. That is great. Like I said, there hasn't really been much to gain outside of just notching wins in the win column, which honestly, in itself, pretty significant because you'd rather be winning close games than losing close games. First 4-0 start for the program, or first 4-0 start for the team since 2016. Lamar Jackson ended up going 4-0. They now will turn their attention to NC State on the road in Raleigh on Friday evening to try to go 5-0, which the Cardinals have not done since Teddy Bridgewater's last year in 2013, the lone season in the American Athletic Conference. That team in 2016, unfortunately, did lose to Clemson in the 5th game of the season. But overall, you've handled business. And that deserves a pat on the back. You win the games you're supposed to win. And people will say, well, I mean, that sort of seems counterproductive considering that you're supposed to win the games. We know that Louisville has a tendency over the past, honestly, ever since I've been alive, over the past 25 years, to lose games that they're not supposed to lose. And it's nice that even when you are continuing to improve, even when you have some early season struggles, like Georgia Tech, like Indiana, you're still finding ways to close out games because that is an extremely encouraging and inspirational, that's a great trait to have because some teams just don't have that, unfortunately. And we've seen that happen in years past. I think that this brand of offense is absolutely contagious. It's electric. It's exciting. The defense, I think, is going to continue to get better and better as the season goes along. And now you sort of enter that second portion of the schedule to where you really determine what the ceiling for this team is going to be. You start out right away against NC State. Look, I am higher on NC State than a lot of people. People will say, well, NC State, I mean, they're 3-1 on the season. They barely beat Virginia. They weren't convincing against UConn. They got blown out against Notre Dame. And then they beat VMI. On the road in Raleigh on a Friday night, that's going to be a tough environment. This is the first true road test that's not at an NFL stadium for Jack Plummer, for the Louisville Cardinals, for Jeff Brom. We're going to see just how far along this team is when they play against NC State. I think it's going to be the best team that they played thus far. It's a solid offense, but a pretty good defense. This is going to be the best defensive test, one of the best defensive tests that they will face all season long. Very good defense for the NC State Wolfpack. But 4-0, first time since 2016. Like I said, we will not have a couple episodes until Thursday, and then we will preview this upcoming matchup against NC State. We'll also talk about whether or not Louisville cracks the top 25 AP poll rankings. We will see. But that's going to wrap up this instant reaction episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Be sure to stay tuned to this graphic to find the Locked On Louisville podcast, free and available wherever you get your podcasts.